What's up, everybody? It's Soren Baker here on Unique Access Entertainment. As always, please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. That enables us to keep coming to y'all as often as possible with as many interviews and commentaries as possible. So please hit that subscribe button, like our content, share it, talk about it, be about it, each one, teach one. And we appreciate your support in getting us this far. Now, today on the 1st and 15th, man, we're getting into a heavy subject because, a lot of people saw that recent Instagram or social media posts that have been going on with the evolution of rap and its relationship with drugs, which I thought was pretty interesting. But it also made me think of things on a bigger scale and wanted to dive into that a little bit, which is why I wanted to do this video. Now, when I was first getting into rap, lyrically at least, rap was extremely anti-drug use of any kind, including weed. But the first main song I remember hearing that was super anti-drugs was White Lines Don't Do It by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. That came out in 83. I heard it later than that because I wasn't even really into or listening to rap at that time, given that I wasn't even very old. So I heard the song later, and then, as I learned about things and understood the chronology and stuff, I was like, oh, this is an early song where prominent rappers, in this instance Melle Mel, are breaking down why not to do it, why not to do drugs. And that song had a big effect on me, and I was just like, oh wow. And then my hero, my favorite basketball player, Len Bias, I'm from Maryland, and he OD'd. He was going to be on the Celtics. That's been referenced in Snowfall and all these other major media things. They did a 30 for 30 on him and the situation dealing with his death. So right there, I knew cocaine was super bad. And growing up right in between Baltimore and Washington, Washington was exploding with coke and crack, and as was Baltimore, even though Baltimore also, I later found out, was big into heroin. But bottom line is, there was a lot of things that I was seeing through Len Bias's death, through listening to rap, and these other things that were going on around Maryland, where I was growing up, in Washington, D.C. area. Man, cocaine is bad, and really any kind of drugs are bad, because I saw a lot of this stuff happening with alcohol and with weed, which of course at that time was illegal everywhere. Now some of the restrictions are much looser, and it's legal in several states, but back when I was growing up, it wasn't. And when we fast forward a few years, you get in 1988, in my opinion, the best year in rap history, we get this explosion of rappers not only becoming more popular, but also talking about the perils of being drug addicts. Of course, famously, Public Enemy had Night of the Living Bassheads, a whole song dedicated to this, and they made an amazing video. Mayor of Rap City, Chris Thomas, is in there. I talked to him about that. The link is right there. You want to check that out. MC Lyte was in the video. Flavor Flav was incredible. They made like a mini movie about not doing drugs, and that had a big impact on me because, of course, like many other people in 1988, Public Enemy and that album, Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back, is one of the best, if not the best, rap albums ever. And Public Enemy was on top of the game, and that song, Night of the Living Bassheads, was one of the reasons why. But Public Enemy certainly wasn't the only prominent rap group to say doing drugs was bad. If you look at EPMD on Strictly Business, Sniff Blow, hell no, they say. And, that was just another prominent thing. EPMD was huge at the time, going gold with Strictly Business. Rob Bass, Don't Smoke Buddha, Can't Stand Sesh Yes on It Takes Two, my favorite song of all time. And that was a dance party, type of song. N.W.A, famously, Dr. Dre.
I don't smoke weed or sex, cause it's known to give a brother brain damage. And brain damage on the mic don't manage nothing but making a sucker in you equal.
So right there, he's talking about, this is N.W.A of all groups, talking about the hardest hardcore dudes, talking about they don't smoke weed. And tied into that, and more significantly, was Dope Man by N.W.A, which you had Ice Cube rapping from the perspective of the drug dealer, and then Eazy-E coming on as the drug dealer. And anyone that listens to Dope Man, yes, there's a lot of profanity. Yes, there's a lot of harsh descriptions of what's going on, but for people that were around at that time or that understood what was going on, and I was removed from it, but I would read about it and I saw little glimpses of it when I would go into Baltimore or DC, or when I would see things around me but not close to me. Like, man, that's not a situation what Ice Cube is describing, this scene of that the dope man is the overlord of. That's not something you wanted to be in. He describes the dope man as a terrible person. He describes the dope man's girlfriend as a strawberry who's like a terrible girl, and that you wouldn't want her to be, you know, your woman. And then when Eazy-E comes on portraying the drug dealer, he's a despicable dude. And nowhere in that dope man song did I think like, oh man, that's something I aspire to be or want to be living around or with, or man, they'd make good neighbors. Like, no, this is, they're telling you how terrible this is and how it's ravaging the community, Ice Cube in South Central, N.W.A and Compton, but that also applied basically everywhere where drugs were running rampant throughout the United States, especially in underserved Black and brown communities across our country. And to me, that really, really showed me that, one, Ice Cube is a phenomenal writer, Dr. Dre is a phenomenal producer, but they were able to show you the ills and the terrors that were going on with this. Ice-T did that with Gangs on Colors, and Ice Cube and N.W.A did it with Dope Man for drug dealers. And I just was like, this is amazing and so powerful. And that's when I started understanding that these guys were very anti all of this. And then, you know, even though blunts became a little bit more popular in a couple of years, you know, even at Big Daddy Kane referred to Smoke Raw, Smoke You Up Like a Blunt on Raw, which is one of his biggest songs at the time. So in this 1998 era, you had all these huge artists. We got N.W.A, we got Public Enemy, we got Rob Bass, we got EPMD, we got Big Daddy Kane, among many, many, many others that were, you know, telling you how terrible drugs were. And then on the flip side, you had people like Schoolie D talking about smoking weed, and Tone Loc with Chiba Chiba, but neither of those songs, neither Schoolie D's material dwelled on it. And of course, Tone Loc, by comparison, got much more popular for Funky Cole Medina and Wild Thing. So, you know, that kind of flew under the radar. And then once we get into the 90s, we get into the reluctant drug dealer, but then we also get into the celebration of marijuana, which of course came, you know, Cypress Hill. Schoolie D talked about it, and Cypress Hill sampled him on their eponymous debut album from 91. But, you know, you have Cypress Hill, you have Redman, How to Roll a Blunt. Cypress Hill did it, Stoned is the Way of the Walk, Something for the Blunted on their album. Redman then comes back with How to Roll a Blunt. And then, of course, we get The Chronic. But also around this time, and through largely gangster rap and the street reporting, we had the rappers. Biggie did this, of course, early on in the game too, but rapping about selling drugs because it was, quote unquote, the only option. And, you know, being pressed into this bad situation, and they were using drugs to feed the family. They were using drugs to create opportunities. They were using drugs to reinvest in other businesses that were legit. And this, of course, is the type of thing that is old as America itself. Of course, the Kennedys, who later became one of the most powerful families in the United States and in United States history, were running moonshine and hustling alcohol. So doing things illegally with drugs is not unique to rappers. It's not unique to Black men, and it's not unique to the recent phenomenon. This is something that's been going on in the underground Black market of the United States for centuries. So this is not anything new. And the criminalization of it isn't anything new either. Of course, alcohol, after the moonshine bootleg era became legal, and now, you know, billions and billions of dollars annually are generated from alcohol sales. And we're moving toward that with marijuana, but not in the early 90s when the rappers were talking about it. On the one hand, talking about selling weed and then starting to talk about consuming weed in a way that was a celebration. Obviously, Cypress Hill was very pro marijuana and remains very pro marijuana, but Cypress Hill took it a level deeper. And even on their new album, Back in Black, they talk about the legalization of it, the criminality of it. And this is an album that came out in 2022. So they started talking about it in 91 and all the way up to 2022 are still championing marijuana, trying to educate people about using it, about hemp, about all these different things with cannabis. So it's not purely a glorification for getting high purposes. They're trying to do a well-rounded thing, which of course most artists do not. So Cypress Hill not only was a pioneer in many ways, but also remains an anomaly because they're also trying to show you like a deeper level of the game, shall we say. And, you know, that's what it is. And of course, with Black Sunday, when they came back in 93 after the Chronic, you know, their first song is I Want to Get High. Later on in the album, they have Hits from the Bong. Now, of course, that Insane in the Brain and Ain't Going Out Like That are the more popular singles as far as videos and radio play and all that. But I Want to Get High and Hits from the Bong are definitely two of the more popular songs for people that know and love Black Sunday from Cypress Hill. And then, of course, we have The Chronic, where the whole name of the album is about high-powered weed. And then we have, you know, all these different things that are coming out in this early to mid 1990s era, while the rappers are talking about their street credibility. And one of the main reasons and ways that they go about justifying their stripes per se is because of their ability to sell drugs in high volumes, high quantities. Now, of course, all of this ties directly into a lot of artists that were doing the opposite of that still, as we saw in 88, and talking about the dangers of criminality. Ice-T remained doing that from the time that he emerged as one of the early gangster rappers from 6 in the Morning. Ice-T was always warning people about hustling, doing illegal things, and how that was going to, you know, result in you either being dead, locked up, or in some sort of terrible situation. And that's what Ice Cube did. That's what Schoolie D did. And Compton's Most Wanted, Project Pat, all these guys, DJ Quick, etc. The great gangster rappers always did that. And a lot of that, of course, is tied to drug dealing and other illegal activities. But, you know, once we get to the mid and late 1990s, then the game flipped to where it was drug dealing brought me all these great things, or I'm your neighborhood drug dealer, and it became celebrated. Of course, Jay-Z is prime of that, and he has used that throughout his career in different ways to talk about it, to celebrate it, to promote it, to talk about how much money he made dealing drugs. So, I mean, Jay-Z is one of the biggest, most prominent rappers still in 2022. And, you know, he even still talks about drugs in his raps now. So it's not as though he left that alone in the 90s or the 2000s or the 2010s. So that allure is still there. And then, of course, we have in the mid and late 90s, we have someone like Master P, the Ice Cream Man, talking about being the neighborhood drug dealer. And these are all things that got into rap. Master P from 97, 98, 99 was one of the biggest, if not the absolute biggest thing in rap. And then, of course, all this time, you have the other artists talking about using, abusing, etc. with drugs. And now it's becoming more and more prominent to sell drugs, mainly weed though, and to sell cocaine. But once we get into the early 2000s, then the game flips again to where it's now, you know, especially in the South, we're talking about using lean and syrup. And of course, 2000, we have 3 6 Mafia was sipping on some syrup. Their, at the time, biggest song to that point that got them, you know, platinum plaques, got them huge exposure, crossed them over to a much bigger audience, especially a bigger white audience. And they saw heights up to that point in their career they hadn't seen. And sadly, also in 2000, DJ Screw passed, and screwing music had been going on, of course, for years, and that was to listen to and enjoy while on lean. And the challenge of all of this is we are, as hip hop culture, creating music and celebrate it, listening to it, and all these things tied directly into using and abusing very serious, heavy, life-altering drugs in a way that, as I said toward the beginning of the video, rap at least outwardly was saying it was bad to do these drugs. Now, Melle Mel and MC Shan, of course, had been talking about terrible drug stuff as well. I should have shouted out MC Shan for doing that with Jane Stop This Crazy Thing.
And see, and why I made songs like that, because don't do what I do. It was more of a teaching thing. Although I might have been in the studio singing Jane Stop This Crazy Thing on cocaine and Justin sniffed the 8-ball, it was the thing of don't be like me. Don't do what I do, and don't take the fall that I took. It was more of a don't do it thing. Unlike the music today, it's like more drink more lean, smoke more weed, fuck yourself up as much as possible. You know what I'm saying? Where my messages were different.
Shan, Melle Mel, and others were also at the same time lamenting that, but then, of course, sadly and unfortunately, were behind the scenes doing drugs and doing these heavy drugs because they were more party drugs or closet drugs at the time. But by the time we get to sipping on some syrup, DJ Screw, Big Mo's doing purple stuff, these artists are getting huge exposure, and they're promoting using these drugs that are mind altering and that have lasting effects, and that some kids obviously are inspired and encouraged to do the drugs because they're listening to this music. And that only accelerates as time goes on with the 2010s, and now that we're in the 2020s, we got Future, Juice WRLD, of course, and his death, and many, many, many others, unfortunately, that have passed because of ODing on drugs. And the reality is, rap has a part in all of this, but just as in every other form of art, I think it's more important and crucial to really understand that rap, like almost all art in every single way, is a trickle up. So what's happening in our society trickles up into our lives, into our families, into our art, into our neighborhoods, into our society, from what's happening in our society, and then what our society projects outwardly through entertainment. And we see recently that people promoting more and more that say TikTok is, in the United States, promoting negative things, whereas in China it promotes positive things. And as true as that is or isn't, to me the important part is, if we look back to the 80s with all the examples I cited, and there's dozens of others I didn't, all these artists were saying don't do drugs. Selling drugs is bad, both from a user perspective, from how it destroys the community, and then of course we all know the disproportionate amount of Black and brown people that were incarcerated for selling, using drugs on these nonviolent offenses that have sapped and destroyed generations of families for nonviolent offenses that some states are finally starting to remedy. But that's 20 years that have been lost, and that's tens of thousands of lives that have been lost. And this is can't be undone at this point. And that, to me, is the real travesty, that society has evolved in a way that we have become comfortable with the explosion of opiates, with the explosion of lean, with the explosion of marijuana when used irresponsibly, with the explosion of alcohol when used irresponsibly. Like, all of this in our society and in our culture, which has nothing to do with rap, all of that is celebrated. And then when you get into rap, of course it's celebrated because now it's part of society. And to me, that is the ultimate danger and the ultimate disappointment, that we have lost a lot of this social commentary and a lot of this responsibility from the artistic community that isn't there as much. Because when you look at the Public Enemies, the EPMDs, the Rob Bases, the MC Shan, the Melle Mels, the N.W.As, the Ice Cubes, we need those type of artists to have the balance of the 2022 to 2023 equivalents of those artists to say that type of stuff on such a major scale. And that to me is the challenge and the disappointment, and where things need to go to get back this balance that we had in the 80s. Because as I'd mentioned before, Schoolie D in 85 was talking about how he did some coke, he did some weed, he was drinking wine, he was doing this stuff. His 1988 album was called Smoke Some Kill. Tone Loc had a song called Chiba Chiba. So people rapping about doing drugs, and drugs in rap was not anything new by the time that Cypress Hill really promoted it per se in a positive way. But there was also a lot of balance and a lot of things to think about. And Cypress Hill, to their credit, on their liner notes would put in information about hemp, about the benefits and the uses of hemp in particular in different ways than just using it for recreational smoking to get high. And I think that's where, as a community, as an artistic community, that I think it's important to understand. Because go back and look, like people forget, if you go back and look at New Jack City, Boys in the Hood, a lot of these movies are viewed as these violent gangster movies. But if you look at it, the commentary that the characters in those films are talking about, especially at the end of New Jack City, where there's the postscript where they talk about, you know, drugs and drug dealers ravaging cities across the country. Nino Brown dies. Nino Brown causes the death of a lot of people and a lot of strife through the Cash Money brothers. And then in Boys in the Hood, Ricky dies, Doughboy dies. The neighborhood is decimated because of drugs. And then of course there's the gang element there as well. And I think it's just important to notice the way that our films, our movies, and more importantly, people have changed to where it's cool to use drugs and to use these things that have literally no positive benefit in our lives. And seeing that IG post of this evolution of rap made me think about it from a more detailed perspective as opposed to a surface level thing, which is why I want to come to you here on the 1st and 15th with this video, because I think it's important to look at these things, to ponder them, to think about them, and to really, really examine how and why they're happening. And of course, people could look at more sinister reasons as far as the industry, or as far as, major corporations when they push and promote this. But yes, of course, that does happen disproportionately to black and brown and underserved communities. But a lot of white people are dying from all this stuff too. And that's something that shows that this is a bigger epidemic than even the white media wants to portray, because this is happening, more than 100,000 people, I believe, in 2021 died from opiate overdoses. So this is an epidemic that's affecting our entire society, which is why I do believe it's a trickle up thing from the rampant drug use that we're seeing from people in the United States that is now bleeding, unfortunately, into a lot of our art and a lot of the stuff that kids that are forming these decisions. Do I do drugs? Do I don't? Do I pop this pill? Do I not pop this pill? If they're looking up to these artists who are promoting doing 30 Xanax, then they might be more inclined to try one, just as a lot of kids were inclined to drink or smoke weed or what have you. And I think it's just becoming so pervasive that it's becoming more of a challenge to try to rein it back in. We've opened Pandora's box, and where are we now other than a nation of drug addicts? So that's what I wanted to say, and was all inspired from that IG. So definitely please think about this stuff. If you have kids, talk to them about it. And, of course, I didn't even mention fentanyl till now, but that adds a whole other layer because you're going to die, and just period. So I just encourage you to think about this stuff, talk to your friends about it, talk to your family members. And, rap obviously is my favorite thing in the world and has a big part to do in all of this. And that's why I wanted to talk about it here on the 1st and 15th for Unique Access. Thank you for watching. Hit me in the comments section, hit us in the comments section, and let us know what you think of this video. And we look forward to seeing you next time on the 1st and the 15th.
Be sure to check out the History of Gangster Rap by Soren Baker. He's official.
History of Gangster Rap features exclusive interviews with Ice-T, Snoop Dogg, MC Ren, the D.O.C, and dozens of others. The History of Gangster Rap, a definitive look at how Los Angeles changed rap forever.
In Los Angeles, the streets definitely set the tone of the hip-hop music.
A 19, I got a $50,000 car.
My whole angle always was, I'll be street, but I will always tell you the horrors that go along with this life.
There will be penalties and casualties for just wearing the wrong color in somebody's neighborhood.
And once gangster rap made it from the streets to the TV, the genre exploded.
With Fab 5 on your MTV Raps with N.W.A.
Yo MTV, it just catapulted us from being local heroes to national gangbang rappers.
The History of Gangster Rap discusses it all from 1980 up till today.
It's always gonna be shit happening in the streets. You know what I mean? So it's always gonna be something to talk about.
The History of Gangster Rap in stores now.